Heart disease is the leading cause of death for women in the U.S., with 44% living with some form of heart disease. A new landmark study recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine has shown the importance of how taking a simple blood test can predict cardiovascular risk in women in the future. Here to discuss the results of this study and more is Dr. Pyle Coley, founder and medical director of Cherry Creek Heart. Thank you so much for being here today, Doctor.
Thank you for having me and for talking about this really important issue that we just can't talk about enough.
What were the findings of this new research from the Women's Health Study?
A really interesting study, actually very provocative, because it changes the way we think about heart disease. In the past, we had sort of been reactive. We wait for heart disease and then we do something about it. Now, it's saying let's be proactive. So it looked at women in their 40s and 50s when they were healthy and checked these three blood tests that we already have available. One is a cholesterol panel, which we get every year. The second is an inflammation marker, which we hadn't thought to check before. It's called C-reactive protein, or CRP. And the third is a genetic test of a fat particle in our blood called lipoprotein A. Also something until recently we hadn't really been checking before. So those other two markers were really sort of unique and new markers. And what it found is that if you have one elevated, your risk is higher, two is even higher, and three is the highest. So these three markers actually help us to kind of look forward, predict the future, and figure out whether you're going to go on to have a heart attack or a stroke.
And what exactly is chronic inflammation and why is it dangerous?
You know, inflammation evolved to protect us. You know, we get a cut, inflammation turns on, it heals the cut, we get better. But what happens when inflammation turns on when it's not supposed to turn on, or it stays on too long or chronically, that's when it starts to, wreak havoc inside our body. So that's what chronic inflammation is inflammation turned on incorrectly or staying on too long. And what we see is that cholesterol deposits in the arteries can trigger inflammation to come on, can turn it on. And because they're there all the time, they promote chronic inflammation. And the thing about inflammation is that inflammation begets more inflammation. So the more that it turns on, the more cholesterol sticks, the more the inflammation turns on, the more the cholesterol sticks. And then eventually one day that plaque, that cholesterol deposit gets so angry that it just pops open, causes a blood clot, and that's when you have your heart attack and stroke. So the way we think about risk, we always thought about cholesterol. Now we're also thinking about inflammation as a way to predict risk and maybe even modify your risk.
How can reducing inflammation decrease the incidence of cardiovascular risk?
So this inflammatory risk pathway that we've now come to appreciate, it's not just cholesterol risk, but inflammatory risk is so important too. And I think, we as women and in general, knowing that heart disease is the #1 killer of women, need to start thinking about all the ways in which we can live healthier, live better earlier in our lives to reduce cholesterol and to reduce inflammation. Now, a lot of lifestyle factors, losing weight, being active, sleeping 7 to 9 hours, environmental pollution, alcohol, smoking, all of these things can impact inflammation. So there's a lot of stuff that's in our control when it comes to inflammation. But for some women who have chronic inflammation and have had heart attacks or strokes, there's now even a medicine that targets inflammation. It's called colchicine. It's been around for a couple of decades, but we've recently only started using it for heart disease in patients who've already had heart attacks or strokes. And it's a low dose, 0.5 milligrams, and that can help to turn off the inflammation and reduce the risk as well. So these kind of three parallel pathways, the cholesterol, the inflammation, and then this lipoprotein A pathway, which again was underappreciated before, but it's something that we have medicines coming for as well. And something that if yours is elevated, it triggers, your family members, your kids, your siblings, and et cetera, to get checked as well.
And where can we go to find out more information?
I would send you to two resources. The first is the American Heart Association's website. It's called Life's Essential 8. You type that into Google, you go there and you do these 8 things and you can reduce your risk of having a heart attack or stroke. And it's actually a fun website because you can put in what you're doing and it tells you what you need to change in order to do better. And the second is a website called cbdinflammation.com if you want to read more about inflammation or the role that it has in heart disease.
Dr. Coley, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that we as women can really get empowered by this information.